Hello, welcome to the interview lecture. Today we're going to learn about how to prepare for an interview, how to answer difficult questions, and we're going to learn how to close the interview as well and what to do afterwards. So this is a great lecture if you haven't been on an interview before, which some of you may have not. But even if you have some interviewing experience, hopefully a lot of these tips and some of these formulas that I'm going to share with you help you in improving some of your answers and your outcomes. So let's get to it. So there are 4 C's of hiring decisions, okay? The first is competence. Now, you demonstrate competence through your resume. So the resume is the, yes, in theory, I could do this job because I have the experience, and I have the education and the training and all of that. So the resume covers a lot of competence. So once you've dealt with competence, though, now you have to figure out who do you like? Who do you think will be a good fit for this office? So that's where chemistry comes into play. And that's where the interview really highlights this part, okay? So chemistry is all about, do we like this person? Competence is, can this person do the job? Chemistry is, do we like this person? Okay? So chemistry is going to be all about your interpersonal skills, how you present yourself. Do you appear to be a good cultural fit for the department or for the company? And so the interview heavily emphasizes this part. Then you have competition, and this is assessed all throughout. So you could be a really good candidate, and you could have all the qualifications, and the hiring committee can really like you. But there's somebody else out there who just they like a little bit better. Okay, so the thing about interviewing is that because it comes down to things that are hard to measure, like chemistry and competition, you can feel like that you've totally rocked an interview. And I'll have clients who'll say, man, I totally kicked butt on this interview, and I answered this question well, and they said this, and they took me on a tour, and they said this, this, and this, and I felt really good, but I didn't get the job. And it's one of those things where all you can really do is just, kind of throw your hands up, and it's just hard to know, like, what was it exactly that might have had them hire somebody else. And a lot of times it's things out of your control. Maybe there was an internal candidate, maybe they already knew somebody, or they already had somebody in mind. So it's really hard to assess the cause of you not getting a job sometimes in interviewing, because you have things like chemistry and competition, which you really can't measure that well. And then, of course, there's a compensation element as well. And this is just making sure that the company can't afford you, okay? Because they might really like you, they might think you're very competent, they might think you're the best in the competition, but your salary requirements are just too high that they just can't afford you, okay? So compensation can be filtered out at various points in the hiring process. Sometimes in the online job application, they'll ask for salary requirements. So there they can already filter you out, but they might mention it in the interview. Okay, and then that's maybe how they'll do compensation. The worst time for it is at the end when you're in the offer stage and they tell you, like, you're really excited about this job, and then you find out it's like it's paying half of what you were hoping to make. So hopefully a company, when they're going through the hiring process, they're upfront about compensation early, so you can make that decision early. So the first thing I want to do then, now that we kind of have a general understanding of the hiring process and what the interview his role is in that, we need to have some framework about interview preparation in general, okay? So here's the thing. A lot of people think of interviewing as an oral exam. So this is what clients and students and people will basically come to me and say. They'll come in and they'll be like, what's the right answer to this question? When they say, tell me about yourself, what's the right answer? Okay. And so they think of interviewing as an oral exam where it's like, people are asking you questions and you're supposed to give the right answer. Okay. And if you get too many wrong, then you fail the interview. The problem with that kind of framework of interviewing is that the interview goes 2 ways. Okay. Just as they are asking you questions and trying to make sure that you're a good fit for them, you're also, on your end of things, trying to figure out if they're a good fit for you. So the interviewers know this, and they have to also make a good impression on you, because if you turn out to be the best candidate, they want it to be the case that you will pick them. Because when you're on the job market and you're applying for multiple jobs, it's very possible you could be interviewing with multiple people. So if it's an oral exam, it's a two-way oral exam where they're testing you and you're testing them. So it's not really the best fit for making sense of interviewing, okay? So the interviewer could even be just as nervous as you are if they're not very experienced with interviewing, which in some cases you'll run into that. So I don't really like to think of it as an oral exam. Some people think of interviewing as like tennis or a competitive activity, okay, of some kind, where basically you have to come in and you have to control the interview, right? And you have to start making the interviewer answer questions and like throw the interviewer off his or her game, okay? So then at that point it becomes a competitive activity, okay? And you'll see people, even on YouTube, who will kind of try to get you to do something like this and they'll try to coach you to do it. I've never really seen it done well, okay? So, and here's the problem with that kind of framework, okay? In tennis or in a competitive activity, you really want your competition to be terrible, right? Like you want to dominate them, you want them to just not be good at all. But in a hiring decision, in a hiring situation, there is no worse decision you have to make than the lesser of like 6 evils, okay? So you're thinking like this election, the lesser of 2 evils. That's the worst kind of hiring decision to be in, is when all the candidates are terrible and you have to choose between all these terrible candidates and probably declare a failed search and then have to do the whole process over again. So what the interviewers are really hoping for is that they're really hoping that you're going to be good, right? Really, what the interviewers want, they want 5 awesome candidates who are just so awesome that they have to like really think about who is going to be the best, because all of these people could be good, right? That's the best kind of situation to be in. So if anything, the interviewers want you to be awesome. They want you to be good. They're cheering for you, essentially, because nobody really wants to sit through an awkward interview, right? Like an awkward, bad situation. It's awkward for you, it's awkward for them, and it's just way better when you're awesome. So they're cheering for you. So don't think of it as the interviewer is out to get me. How do I like outsmart the interviewer and just, win this competition, okay? So I don't like to think of it as a competitive activity. The framework I like is interviewing as dating. Because if you think about what dating is a test of mutual compatibility. You're getting 2 people together and you're figuring out, okay, would you be a good partner to me and would I be a good partner to you? Okay, so it's a two-way street, so it deals with the problem of the oral exam. The second aspect is in dating, nobody really wants to go on a bad date. Like you're not getting ready for your first date and just hoping that it's terrible and that like your date is just an awful human being. Most of the time the excitement is, oh man, I see a lot of potential in this person. I hope this person is great. I hope this person is awesome. I hope this is happily ever after. So dating is much more positive in its approach, okay? And so it's not the competitive activity of tennis, okay? And what I also like about the interviewing as dating is that it's a test of mutual compatibility and chemistry, right? Do we like this person? Is this person somebody who we can see ourselves being with for a long time in our office, right? Can we get along with this person, okay? So dating is an opportunity to get to know somebody, right? And so think of the interview as a time to get to know a company and to see what they're like and if they're a good fit for you. And if they're not, then you can, let them know, in your thank you letter, I'm not interested. But, and it can go the same way for them as well. So I know a lot of you may have different dating experiences, but this should be an exciting thing. Interviewing should be one of the most exciting things you do in the job market, because it is this opportunity to have this new experience and to learn about these new companies and make new network connections. And you should be loving this opportunity to get to answer questions about yourself and talk about your history and get to know the company. So highly recommend it. So there are 3 phases of the interview process, and we're going to talk about each of these phases: preparation, performance, post-game. So let's get to it. So let's start with preparation. So the first thing you need to do is a mental preparation, besides the framework part, and that is have your 3 selling points. So in my previous lecture on resume writing, remember that we have headline plus story. So remember, your 3 selling points are supposed to be the 3 reasons why this employer should hire you. Okay, if you don't know why you should be hired, well, the employer isn't going to know either. Okay, it's kind of like if you're a salesperson and you're trying to sell vacuum cleaners, and a customer asks you, why should I buy it? Well, I don't know, it's a vacuum cleaner. It's a vacuum cleaner. It sucks stuff. Like, okay, not very good, right? You need to have three really good complete sentence reasons why you should be hired. Use headline plus story if you're going to use personal attributes. Okay, so if you're going to do personal attributes, or if you're going to use headline plus story, which I think you should, with your 3 selling points. So for example, I'm very dependable. At my previous job, I was in charge of managing keys for all the different departments, and I was able to not lose any of the keys, and I was able to appear to work every day on time, something like that. I'm just kind of making something up as I go along. But there you have the headline plus story. So refer back to the resume lecture for more on that. Now, here's the difference between headline plus story on a resume and headline plus story in an interview. Okay, so in a resume, because you're going to do resume speak, and you can't use I, you don't use you use action verbs, you don't use articles, those kinds of things. A headline plus story on a resume summary might be something like proven dependability, consistently maintained key database during previous jobs, something like that. It's very abstract, okay? So in an interview, an abstraction might be something like this. I'm very dependable. Anytime I'm given some kind of task, I always get it done on time, and I've never had an opportunity. There's never been a time when I failed to uphold a task, something like that. Okay, so that's an abstraction. So a story abstraction is one where there isn't really a set plot. It's just kind of like an overall pattern or theme that you're hitting on. A concrete story is one that has a concrete plot to it. So a headline plus story with a concrete story might be something like this. I'm very dependable. One time, my boss asked me to stay after work and watch these employees fulfill a project deadline. And when I was given that task, I was able to not only ensure that the employees completed the project deadline on time, but I also helped them work much more efficiently so that we actually saved some money at the end of the project. So that's a concrete story because I'm talking about a particular instance. So when you're interviewing, you're probably going to use more concrete stories than abstractions. Okay? So what you need to do when you're thinking about your selling points and in your answers in general is you want to think of particular instances where you've done this particular thing or have demonstrated this attribute. Now, in your concrete stories, there's usually 3 parts that people like in an interview. And there's different names for it. I call it, it's problem, action, result. So that's what PAR stands for, or PAR. Some people call it STAR, situation, task, action, result, but it's all the same thing. So problem is, here's the problem that you encounter. So in my previous concrete story, the boss asked me to stay after work late to supervise the employees. The action is what I did to deal with this problem. So I can say, so I watched the employees closely and I actually helped them work more efficiently. I inspired them, something like that. And then the results was they got the project deadline done ahead of time, and we actually saved the company some money. So there are some results. So when you tell your stories, you want to make sure you have these things in it. Some kind of problem or challenge that you rose up to, how you dealt with the challenge, and what the results were. Okay? So what's nice about PAR or STAR or whichever one you want to use is that it keeps your stories focused, because sometimes the problem is when people tell stories in interviews, they give a lot of unnecessary details, and so it makes really long-winded answers, and then you lose the interview. You lose the interviewer. So with a concrete story, if you use problem, action, result as kind of a framework or a foundation or an outline, then that'll help you keep your stories succinct. Okay? So Story time. Interviewing is story time, essentially. So we are called Homo narrans for a reason by some anthropologists. We are attracted to stories. So that's what you need to think of interviewing as. The second part, mentally, that you need to prepare. So you need to know why employers should hire you. So you got to have selling points, and you got to be able to think of stories, concrete stories of you upholding your selling points. The second part is, why should they hire you? So one problem that a lot of job seekers have with interviewing is a lot of them get nervous. And the reason they get nervous is because they have some kind of stigma. And a stigma is a personal belief that you hold about yourself that makes you feel unqualified for a job. So people have different stigmas. People in mid-career have a belief that their age holds them back and prevents them from getting hired. You know, I'm 45, so I can't get hired anywhere. Some people, the stigma is they got terminated from their previous job, so they feel like nobody wants to hire them now. So these are all stigmas, right? Some kind of belief, limiting belief that you have that makes you think that nobody wants to hire you, okay? So if you're going to do a little exercise and you feel like you have one of these, the first thing is you need to identify it, and you need to give it words, okay? So we can control it, because when you can name it, you can control it. That's from the design lecture. So figure out, if you have stigmas, what is it, okay? And just put it in a sentence. My stigma is that I was let go from my previous job, and it makes me unqualified, or it makes employers not want to hire me because then they think that I'm incompetent, okay? So that might be a stigma. So then what you want to do is you want to turn your stigma. So to turn your stigma is to ask yourself, but what if it was a good thing? Okay? What if it was a good thing that you got let go from your job? But just imagine for a minute. What if it was a good thing? Why might it be good? Okay? So, and it's hard to do electronically. Like usually this is something you have to sit down with somebody and talk with them interpersonally about this. But here are some common answers to these things. So if you were let go from your previous job, I mean, maybe a good thing that comes out of it is you've had a chance to now take a step back away from your work and learn from the mistake. And because you've learned from it, you're actually now better. You're going to be a better employee now because you know that maybe coming in late really hurts the company. Or now you're going to become more dependable because when you got let go for coming in late, you actually became more organized and you've learned to manage your time better. And in fact, now you even have an alarm clock and a planner, so that way you meet all of your appointments on time. And now you're even more dependable as a result. So that's a way you turn the stigma. You say, what if it was a good thing? How can I make this a good thing? So being let go from a job, you learn from the mistake and become better, and you work harder. You know, age is something where, you know, you have more experience. So maybe I'm older, but I'm also more experienced, and I have all these opportunities, these experiences that I can bring to the table that can help make things better, right? So it just depends on what your stigma is, and if you have questions or you need help really turning a stigma, then feel free to email me or post or something like that, and we can figure that out. And the big thing is that you want to be in a position where you're not so focused on covering your stigmas, because what happens is people get nervous and they get interview coaching and they're like, what if they ask me about this? And then they get really nervous about it, right? You want to turn your stigma and you want to have an answer prepared so that if they ask you this question, you'll be glad to answer it. Like, you got to get it to the point where you hope they ask this question. You hope they ask you, why did you leave your previous job? You need to figure out and put yourself in a situation where you can be proud of your stigmas. And of course, you know, maybe I don't want to make this like a Tony Robbins seminar or something like that, but that's going to take some positive thinking and some real life changes if you feel like you haven't dealt with your stigma, okay? So it's hard to talk it abstractly without seeing your audience and not being able to have interpersonal feedback, but I hope that helps, and I hope that sets you on a path to start thinking, what if my stigma was a good thing? Because I really do believe the theory or the mantra or the idea that everyone is employable. Nobody is in a situation where they cannot be hired. Okay, the next thing you need to do is you got to know things about the company. So you got to do company research. I often hear, I know a lot of recruiters, and they'll often say, we interviewed this candidate and he really did his homework. And what they mean by did his homework was he really researched the company and he knew the company. So how do you research a company? You got to go to the website. You got to look at their products, their mission, their media appearances, services, benefits, marketing strategy. So here's kind of the little itinerary. So let's say you get a call on Monday and a company wants to interview you. If you have a choice, okay, now this is all assuming you have a choice. If you have a choice as to when you can interview, you want to try to give yourself at least 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours to prepare, okay? Because during that time is when you're going to be doing all this stuff, okay? And so, you know, if they call you on Monday, I would try to interview on Wednesday, if at all possible. Now, during that period, what you're going to want to do, that preparation period, is you're going to want to research the company. You're going to try to know as much of the company as possible. You don't want to come to the interview and be like, oh, what do you guys sell? What do you guys do? Okay, we don't want to do any of that. So the website is a treasure trove of information about a company, and pretty much every company has a website now. Go to their Twitter page. What are they tweeting about? Okay, you can follow the company. It's not a big deal. You know, hundreds of people follow, thousands of people follow a company. It's not going to be a big deal if you follow them. If they have a Facebook page, I would research the company's Facebook page. Because a lot of times, like the Twitter page is kind of the business stuff, but then the Facebook page is kind of more of the fun stuff. So learn about the company culture, and look at their Facebook page and see what they're about. See if they have a LinkedIn page. Some companies do, and see if there's any connections on LinkedIn to people who work at that company. Because if it's a really large company with thousands of employees, maybe there's somebody you know there who already works there, and maybe you can get some insights from that person. And then a great website that I like, and I highly recommend everybody uses, is Glassdoor.com. And Glassdoor.com has interview tips, salaries, and employee reviews about the company. So if you want to know if this is a good place to work, or if you want to learn about how the interview goes, I'll show you some screenshots here. So Glassdoor.com, you just go to the website, and you just type in the job, or the companies and reviews part is what you do over here, and just type in the name of the company that you're wanting to research. Okay, so you just do a little search there. And then what it'll do, so I researched Cerner here, the company will pull up all the information they have about Cerner. So there's 1.2 thousand reviews, or 1,200 reviews about the company. So if you want to know, is Cerner a good place to work? We're not talking about if their product's good. You have 1,200 people reviewing this company. People self-report their salaries. So if you want to try to get a salary range for the job that you're applying for, like if you want to get an idea of how much they're going to pay, they post that. And then they have interview tips. And so here's what this part is. They'll show you, and if you go to the page itself, like they'll show you people who interviewed, whether their experience was positive, neutral, or negative, how they got the interview and how hard they said it was. And then they'll even tell you, like, here's what the interview process was like. Here are some questions that they asked me. And then you get like some background about the person who interviewed. So like, did they accept the offer? And did they rate it as positive? That kind of thing. So you got to collect as much intel as possible when you're preparing for the interview. So I think the interview section of Glassdoor.com is invaluable, because you can at least get an idea of what the format of the interview will be like, get an idea of questions so you can start preparing. So I just think it's wonderful, and you should all use Glassdoor, and it's free. Like all the stuff that I'm showing you is on a free account. So definitely use that, get some intel. But even more to prepare, you can anticipate questions by using the job posting. So what you need to do is you need to put yourself in the position of the employer and just say, okay, I am a CEO, or I'm a hiring manager for a sports management firm, okay, and I'm about to hire my first agent, okay, so what would I expect an agent to be able to do, and what would I expect my agent to be like, you got to just play that whole put yourself in their shoes game. But there's an even more systematic way of doing this, and I'll show you that a little bit later. So there's 3 formats of questions in interviews. So you have behavioral questions, and these are questions that are aimed towards your past behavior. Okay, so behavioral questions usually start with like, name a time when, okay? So like, can you describe a time when, or can you name a time when? Sorry, I'm using my mouse, so it's not as clear as my other one here, so let me underline. Name a time when, right? You dealt with an angry customer. How did you handle it? So that's a behavioral question. It's dealing with your past. Describe a time when. When was a time you had to deal with an angry customer? All of those are behavioral. It's all about past behavior. Then you have abstract questions, which are aimed towards your present, okay? So describe how you handle angry customers. So we're asking the same question here, essentially, right? Name a time when you dealt with angry customers. How'd you handle it? But abstract is describe how you handle angry customers generally, okay? And then you have hypothetical questions. These are questions aimed towards how you would act in a potential situation. So suppose a customer called upset about our service. How would you handle it? So basically, they're all asking the same thing, right? How do you handle angry customers? Now, here's the beautiful thing about headline plus story. Headline plus story works no matter which way they phrase the question. Let me show you. So, behavioral. Name a time when you dealt with an angry customer. How'd you handle it? Well, one time I dealt with an angry customer by really listening to his needs and making him feel appreciated. One time this customer came in and he was upset about a TV, and he was clearly not happy with the fact that it wasn't working that way he wanted it to. So what I did was, during that time when he was telling about his experience, I gave him a lot of nonverbal cues. I really tried to put myself in his shoes, and I gave him as much sympathetic listening as possible. And by the end of it, he actually felt better, and we were able to work out a deal to where he could exchange his TV. So that's how I handle it, through good listening, okay? So I said I deal with angry customers by really listening to their issues and making them feel listened to, and I gave a story. Abstract, aim towards your present. Describe how you handle angry customers. So I'll use the same exact answer. I generally handle angry customers by really making them feel listened to and appreciated. And I know this works because one time, blah, 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 tell the story. Hypothetical. Aim towards suppose a customer called upset about our service. How would you handle it? Well, if a customer came in angry about our service, what I would do is I would really listen to what the customer had to say and make them feel appreciated. And in fact, I've been in this situation before. Tell the story. So no matter what, headline plus story works. You just have to tweak it a little bit, but it all works in the same way. Okay? So use headline plus story. It's beautiful. Now, here's how you can anticipate questions. So here we have a job posting, okay? And in this job posting, there's always different parts of the job posting. So you have company overview, position overview, position duties, desired qualifications, and job perks. So here's what you want to do to systematically anticipate questions. And this is going to also help explain why I went through the 3 formats of questions. What you want to do is you want to go through the job posting. So before we even get to this, when you apply for jobs, you've got to make sure you hold on to the posting. Because what happened to me one time was I applied for a job, but I didn't hold on to the posting. And then 2 months later, I get a call back for an interview. And so I kind of remembered the job, but it was 2 months ago. And so they actually took down the posting. So I didn't have anything, like I had to kind of just go off memory, like I sent my cover letter and resume to prepare for this interview. And it went well, I got the job, but it was just like, if I would have had this would have been nice, okay? So make sure you have the job posting when you apply. So what you want to do is you want to go through the job posting, okay? So, and what you want to do is you want to go through the word. You want to go through the verbiage, okay? So this position requires selling to doctors, top administrators, managing partners of small medical practice. Experience of selling C-level executives is a plus. So here they're mentioning an experience that you want to be aware of. We'll be selling in highly competitive environments. Okay, over here. Sorry, I'm using my mouse today. And strategic thinking, right? All right here. So what you want to do is go through all of the key skills and experiences that they're looking for. So job duties here, okay? And here's what you want to do. You want to go through each of them and ask yourself, when have I ever done this particular thing, okay? So when have I done it? And what's an example of me doing this, okay? So what you want to do is go through each and think of related experiences that you've had to each of these. And you want to have a story or an example of you doing this that you can recall upon memory and talk about if they ask you for it. So when was a time that you've had to prospect for new business, networking, and building relationships? Okay, so depending on your experience, you'll need to think of a time. When have I prospected for new business? If you haven't done that, what's something like prospecting for new business, networking, and building relationships that you've done? Then go through the next one. Managing sales process from lead generation to closing. Okay, when's a time when you've managed a sales process from lead generation to closing? Okay, if you haven't done that, what's something like that? What's something that you've done that's sort of like managing the sales process from lead generation to closing? And you want to be able to give a concrete experience. And you basically just go through the checklist, okay? And so administrating operations of local sales, coordinating with corporate headquarters. Okay, when's a time when you've had to work with people of different departments? See, you can almost write your own interview just going through the different requirements and duties in the job posting itself. Okay, so go through each and find and think of examples of you doing these things or related examples, okay, of you doing these things and have stories in mind. So this is where we get to relevant experience types. So these are the most preferable to the least preferable in order. So direct experience is when you have personally done the duty or responsibility. So if you're applying to be a bookkeeper somewhere and you've been a bookkeeper before, that's direct experience, okay? So when you're going through the job posting, if you have direct experience doing something, then that's your example, and you want to be able to talk about that direct experience. The next level or second kind of experience is indirect experience. And this is where you worked closely with someone who did the duty, but you didn't actually hold the job title yourself. So indirect experience would be something like you were the bookkeeper's assistant. So maybe you didn't do bookkeeping as a formal title, but you were the bookkeeper's assistant, so you did a lot of their duties as an assistant, okay? So that's indirect experience. So if you haven't done the experience, well, did you work with somebody who did? And how closely did you work with them? Then you can talk about that experience. And then you can talk about, yeah, so I was a bookkeeper's assistant, so I'm very familiar with a lot of things that the bookkeeper does. I do know how to use QuickBooks. I do know how to manage Excel spreadsheets, that kind of thing. So that's how you sell your indirect experience. Then you have related experience. And this is where you've not done the duty, but you did something like it in another capacity. So maybe you weren't a bookkeeper formally, but you were a treasurer for student government. So being a treasurer for student government isn't necessarily the same as being a bookkeeper, but there are some transferable skills between the two. So if you're going through the job posting and you're going through the duties and the responsibilities and you don't have direct experience, okay, so you've never had that title, and you don't really have indirect experience either, so you never really worked with someone who has done this job or didn't work with anyone closely, then the next thing you need to look for and go through your head or through your work history is, do I have any related experience? So have I done something that's kind of analogous to this, even though it's not the same thing, okay? And then the last type of relevant experience type, which is really no type at all, but it's just no experience. So you haven't done the duty in any capacity at all, okay? So if you've done something in a classroom setting, then probably that's related experience depending on what it was and how it relates to the job. No experience is kind of like the last resort, okay? You really don't want to be in a situation where you have to say, I have no experience doing X. So hopefully, whatever jobs you apply for, you either have one of these three types of experience for at least 80% of the job posting, okay? So those are the relevant experience types. And so know these and use these. Okay, so what should you wear? That's always a question. So, you know, you have to think about the company you're applying to. Okay, so when we talk about male attire, for example, a shirt and tie combo never hurts, and it's pretty neutral. Now, this gets a little bit complicated because, for example, in blue collar work, if you probably wear a suit for like, you know, a truck driver position, it may be a little overdressing, right? And, you know, there's some complexities with dress, okay? But usually if you do a shirt tie combo, you'll probably be okay. So then suits, blue, black, charcoal, or gray. You always want to match the leathers. Socks, no white socks, dark socks, no tennis shoes. Minimal jewelry for men. Um, the key principle for men is no matter what, clean cut. So you have to make decisions about what you think is going to be appropriate dress. But usually professional dress rarely hurts you. It's always better to overdress than underdress. I will say that. Okay. It's always better to afford too much respect than too little. With women, women have a lot more diversity. So two-piece suits with knee-length skirts or pants are usually fine. You know, if you're going to do the dress thing, wear it with a jacket. But I highly recommend more of the two-piece suit. If you're applying to be an administrative assistant, you know, the dress thing can be fine. But if you're trying to go for management, I would probably say the two-piece suit. Usually closed-toed shoes, pumps, or flats. Jewelry, you want to try to keep it to a minimum, so one per extremity, okay? One ring per finger, one bracelet per wrist, one earring per ear is usually pretty professional. You still wear makeup, but you're not caking it on, you're not Navy SEAL, and you want to avoid noise-making jewelry. The key principle for women is whatever you wear, you don't want to take attention away from your face. So for professional dress, for professional fashion and style for women, in a professional setting, you want men looking at your face, okay? When you go out, nighttime, all that stuff, you can feature other things. But for the professional world, you get credibility at the face level. So here are some examples of just professional dress. So, you know, if you're somebody who has trouble affording these types of things, I highly recommend just going to Goodwill or to a secondhand store. You know, nobody really does brand checks on things. Just make sure whatever you wear, it fits you. So if you go to the Goodwill and you find a nice suit, you still might need to get it tailored. And so you just don't want to make it look baggy, because part of the professional look is that it looks clean, it looks controlled, and it looks like it fits you, okay? But this is just an example of some things to wear. Now, what should you bring? I highly recommend, and I do this myself, so these are not things that I'm kind of just saying from the bench here. You want to bring a professional looking portfolio folder that has several things. First, you want to have some extra copies of your resume. Reason is because sometimes other people decide to sit in on the interview and they may not have a copy for whatever reason. But another reason is because sometimes the way interviewers interview is they actually have a copy of your resume in front of them, and they just make notes on your resume, or they write little questions, and then they just go through your resume. So they're like, okay, in your work experience, you said this, this, and this. Tell us more about this, okay? So you want to have a copy of your resume, because if they ever make a reference to something and you don't remember like the context of it, you can pull that out and you can take a look, okay? I highly recommend a notepad with a writing utensil, and the reason is because you're going to be taking notes. Now, not on yourself. You're not going to be like, oh, that was a good answer, I need to write this down for the next interview. What's going to happen is sometimes the interviewer is going to be conversational with you, and the interviewer is going to tell you things about the company. The interviewer is going to answer some of your questions along the way. It's going to be hard to remember everything, especially if you're interviewing at multiple companies. So what you want to do is you want to show that you're listening by taking notes, right? And that you're really taking in the information. Because if you're just staring at them and they're giving you all this information that's hard to remember, it starts to make them wonder, are you really listening? And are you going to really remember this stuff? So have a notepad with a writing utensil, and when the interviewer is informing you of things, you want to write that down. It's good for reflection later. And also, if the interviewer says something in the interview that's important for the offer period later on, you can refer back to that in your notes. So it's really pretty much a win-win to have a writing utensil and a notepad with you. And then what you should also bring are 3 to 5 questions that you'll ask at the end of the interview. So usually when the interview starts to wrap up, the interviewer will say, do you have any questions for us? And what you want to do is you want to have 3 to 5 questions already written out that you can pull up and say, yes, here are my questions. Because here's what most people do, or a lot of people do anyways. Do you have any questions for us? Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, let me think. Oh, I had a question, but I can't remember. Okay, and so we have this long, awkward period of you trying to remember the questions that you asked. And then you leave the interview, oh, I was supposed to ask him this, you know, and then you're just all upset. It looks a lot more professional, you look a lot more prepared, and you just look way better. When they say, do you have any questions for us? Oh, yes, I do. Let me pull them up here. And then you can just read the question. And then when they answer, as they answer the question, you can write down the answer. So that way it's looking like you're not just asking questions just to ask questions, you're asking the questions with the purpose of writing down the answer. Okay? Makes you look like a good listener, makes you look like you're in control, and makes you just look great overall. Okay? So 3 to 5 questions at the end. And then you want to have a list of references. So you're going to have a references page because remember, references don't go on the resume. And so if the interviewer is kind of like, okay, we really look forward, thank you for coming in today. We're going to need to check your references, so could you please send us a list of references? Well, bam, here it is. Okay, you don't even have to email them. Here's my references, I came prepared, right? Because preparation is professional. So bring these things to the interview. And I would really leave your cell phone not with you. I would not bring it with you to the interview, because even when it's on silence, it still vibrates, and there's nothing more embarrassing. You're trying to answer a question, you're already nervous, and there's a little vibration going on, and the interviewer can hear it. Okay, so turn it off completely. Don't put it on silent. You're not going to need your cell phone during the interview. I highly recommend arriving about 10 to 15 minutes early, unless instructed otherwise. And I highly, highly recommend, if this is possible for you, to take a test drive the day before around the same time of the interview. Because what you don't want to have happen is you think you know where the place is, and Google Maps tells you, but then you can't find it, or the building isn't marked, or you have to park really far away to get to the interview. So you leave with enough time, but then by the time you park, you have to like run to the building to be on time. The worst thing that you can do, the worst way to start off the interview is to be late, okay? And so you need to know the terrain of where you're heading and the traffic patterns and where to park and where the building is and where the room is. You need to know these things ahead of time so you can plan accordingly, because you do not want to start off your interview stressed, huffing and puffing, catching your breath. Oh my God, you know, that kind of thing. Okay, so then there are different types of interviews, okay? So you have the telephone interview, and so these are usually used as first round interviews. Usually they're very screening type, so they're just asking very objective things or very simple questions, maybe 5 questions. They're probably not going to be very long. When you're doing telephone interviews, you got to think about background noise. So you got to be somewhere where it's quiet. You don't have the TV in the background. I've had clients who have said things like, "Oh, I've cooked and done telephone interviews." And like, I'm sure you can hear like the snapping and popping of the frying pan and the microwave going off. And because I would ask them, did you call back? Well, no. I'm like, well, duh, okay. Cell phone reception, go somewhere where you have good reception, and please don't multitask during a telephone interview. And what's nice about telephone interviews, these should be easy. These should be easy to pass, because you can have your notes out, you can have the company website on the computer. I mean, you can have a cup of coffee while you telephone interview. So this is all on your terms. So these should be easy. Then you have Skype interviews, and Skype, there's a lot to it, and I've done a lot of these. So what you need to do is you need to think about the backdrop, okay? If, you know, try to pick something that's professional, right? If there's a stack of books, or just a plain wall, you know, you just don't want your poster of like, you know, I don't know, your favorite actor or actress in the background because it makes you look like you're a teenager. You need to think about Wi-Fi strength if you're Wi-Fiing it. I would wear, okay, so people have different philosophies on clothing with Skype. Some people just wear the top part of their suit and then they wear shorts and flip-flops underneath, you know. I'm one of those people where, like, for me, like, wearing the full suit puts me in the full zone. Like, if I were to have shorts on and wearing a suit, it's just kind of a mixed signal for me. So, and if you ever have to get up or something randomly, then it's kind of embarrassing if they're seeing your gym shorts under your suit. So dress up like as if you were going in person. Camera angle is very important too, okay? So if you're far away, or if it's too close to your face, or we can't see your entire head, like laptops sometimes do that where we can't see your entire face, that's a problem. Lighting, eye contact. Practice looking at the camera, not at the screen, okay? And there's a really good video that I'll have to share, remind me to post it, that goes through how to set up a good Skype interview, okay? And he has all the visuals and all that you'll need to see. Then you have the in-person interview. This is the classic face-to-face, and this is where things like dress, mannerisms, interpersonal skills really come into play. So these are pretty much the 3 ways you get interviewed: telephone, Skype, or in person. So you have to be a master at all 3 to do well in the interview process. Because interviews can be anywhere from 2 to 3 or 4 rounds, maybe even 5 in some cases. So yeah, it's intense. And no matter what, check your tech beforehand. Check your Skype. Make sure it works the day before. Practice Skyping with somebody before you interview. Okay, make sure you're getting good signal. Ask the person, hey, what do you think of this background? Can you see me pretty good? Can you hear me pretty good? You know, ask those kinds of questions and practice. Same with the phone. Call a friend. Hey, do I sound good? Do you hear anything? Do I sound clear? That kind of stuff. And then with people, you can have an individual interview where you have one interviewer, okay? And that might be through the whole process, might just be at the beginning. A panel interview is where you have 2 or more interviewers. I've seen panels of 7 people. I've been on one with 7 people, okay? And I've been on one as few as 1. So when you're doing panel interviews, that's also a little bit of a difference. There's some differences with panel interviews in terms of eye contact distribution, how you address people. The key thing with panel interviews is you got to treat everyone equally. Don't assume that because the decision maker is there, that that's the only person that matters. Because often what happens is this. You may have the key decision maker, maybe he's sitting at the center of the table or she's sitting at the center of the table and you have all the other people on the side. And so you think, okay, I just got to pay attention to the key decision maker. Make all the eye contact with him or her. Don't really worry about the other people, you know, whatever. But then when you leave the room, the key decision maker says, okay, what did you all think of that person? Okay. So if they don't like you or they feel like you shafted them in some way, well, now it's going to come back to bite you. So treat everyone equally. That would be my general advice when it comes to panel interviews. Then you have different interview formats, okay? And these are different approaches to how the interview is actually conducted. So first you have unstructured interviews, okay? These are interviews that will sound very conversational, okay? So the interviewer might be something like this. It might be like, okay, yeah, you know, you come into their office and you're like, oh, hey, Chris, how are you doing? Okay, good. You know, so where are you from, Chris? Oh, I'm from, you know, Ohio. Oh, wow, yeah, I have family in Ohio. Yeah, it's a really good time there. So, yeah, so tell me about yourself, Chris. You know, like, oh, well, I just graduated from the Arkansas State University. Oh, Arkansas State? Oh, yeah, my son goes there for, you know, meteorology. And, oh, wow, that's really cool. Yeah, Arkansas State, I have a really good time there. And, you know, so the unstructured interview is very conversational. And so then the person might be like, yeah, so at this company, we do a lot of work with troubled youth. And so we actually do a lot of work with the local agencies and blah, blah, blah. And so they're very conversational. It doesn't feel like an exam or anything like that. And they're just trying to get to know you. Okay, and maybe your legs are crossed. Maybe you're not sitting at a desk. You're sitting on a couch. So very unstructured, very conversational. You'll probably see these in later rounds, most likely. When you start interviewing with like the president or a manager or somebody who's higher level, because they're not trained interviewers, they're probably going to be more comfortable with this kind of setting. So you can expect this a lot more in the later rounds. And the earlier rounds, you can probably expect more of this, a structured interview, okay, where they very much stick to the schedule. Okay, so a structured interview, a very structured interview might be something like this. So you come in, you sit down, you talk to the person, and they're like, okay, tell me about yourself. So you give your answer, and they're just kind of sitting there writing. Okay, what are your strengths? You give your answer. What are your weaknesses? So maybe they're looking at you, maybe they're taking notes the whole time, but you kind of feel like you're talking to a robot, okay? And it's just kind of like they don't ask follow-up questions, or it's very, very structured, okay? Now, notice this is on a continuum. So maybe at some points in the interview, it's very structured, and maybe at other points it's very unstructured. Maybe you have a little bit of both, okay, going on. But there are people, like, and there are interviewers who sometimes lean to one extreme, one or the other, okay? And it just depends on the interviewer, him or herself, and also the round that you're in. Are you in the first round interview, the third round, the fourth round, that kind of thing, okay? And panels can also vary in terms of how they propose questions. So some panels are a little bit less structured, so they do lightning format where it's random order. So panelist number 1 might go, then panelist number 2, then panelist number 4 might go again, then panelist number 1, then panelist number 3. It's just kind of lightning, okay? So you just don't know who's going to ask next. Some panels do an inquisitorial questioning, where one person holds the floor for a while, asks multiple questions, and then when that person is done, the next person goes. So it's kind of like the Supreme Court, or like, okay, panelist number 1 will ask you a question, okay, and you answer it, and he'll follow up with another question. Okay, so but what about this? And then another question. Okay, and what about that? And this and this and this and this. And then once panelist number 1's like, okay, I think I'm good. So then panelist number 2 goes, and then they're asking you a series of questions. So that's the inquisitorial style. And then you have the sequential style. Okay, and the sequential style is everyone asks in a sequence. So panelist number 1 asks one, then panelist number 2, then panelist number 3, then panelist number 4. Then they go back to panelist number 1, panelist number 2, and each person just asks one question at a time. Okay, so the key thing here is just be aware of what kind of format they're taking, and then just adjust to that kind of style. And now we're on phase 2, performance. Okay, so the first part of the interview is the greetings. And in the greetings, a couple things are going to happen. First, there's going to be a handshake, right? And so I always teach the 4-point handshake. So a handshake is not just about shaking hands. There's a couple other things that need to happen in a good handshake. So number 1 is you need to have good eye contact when you're shaking hands. Nothing looks less confident, less powerful, less charismatic than shaking hands without making eye contact. You know, looking down, looking away can also be seen as rude too. Secondly, you got to smile when you introduce, right? So this is not UFC where you need to like stare down the person and make them scared. You're trying to be friendly. You're trying to be open in an interview. So you want to smile when you introduce and create that kind of rapport. Then you want to give a firm handshake. You know, 2 to 3 shakes is usually good. I've counted, and it's usually on average 3 to 4, 2 to 4 shakes usually is enough for a good firm handshake. And then you always want to make sure you stand up for the interview when you shake. So when the interviewer comes in, you want to show that respect. So you want to stand up for them when you try to handshake. Now, if you're in a place where it's hard to stand up, then you want to at least look like you're trying to stand up. And it's just to show respect and deference to the interviewer, because ultimately it is their interview. It is them who've invited you over to their place. So you want to show them that respect. And then as far as small talk goes, you know, usually you'll handshake. Usually there'll be a small talk phase where people will talk about the weather and the drive there and all that. So the key thing is with small talk is you always want to be positive, right? So I don't encourage lying in interviews ever, except for this one point. When people ask how you are, I don't care how bad your life is and just how terrible the day has been or the week has been and just how crappy everything is. You're good, okay? Everything is good when you're doing the small talk stuff, okay? If you start out all negative, complaining, angry, blaming this, oh, I hate, my week's been awful, this has happened, and this other person said this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's just a bad way to start the interview. You're starting off negative. Then they start to wonder, okay, are you going to talk negative all the time? Are you like this all the time? Too many possible bad outcomes. And it's okay to reciprocate questions. How are you? You know, oh, I'm great. You know, everything's been good. I'm really excited to be here. How about you? How's your week been? Okay, reciprocate, no problem. And it's okay to use artifacts in their office to generate conversation. If you see something interesting, if you see a Chiefs football sitting on their shelf, you can say, oh, so you like the Chiefs, you know, that kind of thing. Make some conversation. That's fine. You're observant. Okay, now we're going to look at the 5 types of questions. And the 5 types of questions are the 5 most common kind, usually include the 5 most common kinds of questions. So let's look at them. So the first type of question that you'll see are biographical questions. Biographical questions are questions about your personal history. So examples might be like, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? Why did you choose this field? All of these are biographical questions. So what's nice about them is that, you know, you should know the answers to these, right? I mean, these aren't things that you have to think deeply about and, you know, oh, I don't know, I have to really think about that. You should know these just by the fact that you've existed, right? And you have some kind of biography. So these are usually asked at the beginning part of the interviews. Usually you can probably expect these. So these are biographical questions. Now, the most common kind of question that is biographical that people struggle with is the tell me about yourself. Now, you can look at all kinds of YouTube videos about how to answer the tell me about yourself question. And so here's my take on it. The tell me about yourself question is essentially an abstract question. So remember when we go back to the three types of questions, hypothetical, behavioral, and abstract, this is more of an abstract question. So what I like to do is I would like to break this down into 5 smaller questions. So you can start out like this. Treat it as 5 small questions and answer the questions in this order. Why did you pick this field? What have you done since you made this choice? What are you looking for now? How did you hear about this company or position, or what drew you to it? And why are you a good fit for the position? So the tell me about yourself question and the answer would essentially be answering each of these questions, each of these 5 questions in a row, okay? So it might go something like this. Let's say I was interviewing for a nursing job. So tell me about yourself. Well, I got into nursing. I got interested in nursing when I was in high school. I was on the basketball team, and one of my teammates got hurt. And so I was one of the first persons on the floor to help this person get better and to get off the court. And ever since then, I really took a strong interest in medicine. So after that point, I went to the University of Washington and I got my nursing degree, my BSN, and I really delved into studies about emergency room nursing. So what I'm looking for now that I've graduated with my degree and I've had all this experience, is an opportunity to pursue what I've enjoyed most, which is emergency medicine. And I'm really drawn to this position in this hospital because this hospital is known for having one of the best ER units in the country. And I know that the culture here between the medical professionals is really good. And I think I would be a good fit for it too, because with all of my training in ER management and ER nursing, I think that I would be able to quickly learn everything that the hospital does. And I already know a couple of people here who I know I can work very well with, something like that. So there, what I essentially did was I just went through the 5 questions. Why did I pick this field? The basketball story. What have I done since I made this choice? I went to college. What are you looking for now? Applying all my skills and experience to become an ER nurse. How did you hear about the company, or what drew you to it? So I went for what drew you to it. So I was drawn to it because the hospital is known for its emergency room stuff. Why are you be a good fit for the position? All my training. I know people. I get along with people. So that's how you do the tell me about yourself question. Now here's the thing. The tell me about yourself question is usually the first question asked in an interview. Okay, it doesn't really make sense to ask it at the end of the interview. Usually it makes the most sense at the beginning. Think of the tell me about yourself question as the kickoff in a football game. And they kick off the ball and you return it for a touchdown. Okay? Think of all the energy and excitement that generates when you're the home team. Okay? If you can kick butt on the tell me about yourself question, it's like taking home the kickoff for a touchdown. And what's amazing is not only does it make a good first impression on the interviewer because you knocked out this question, but look at how many questions you've already answered. Okay? So if the interviewer was going to ask you these things anyways, you already answered it. So now the interviewer has to like regroup and like, oh, well, they already answered a lot of my questions. This is good. Okay, so we can get through this quicker. You see what I mean? If you botch the tell me about yourself question, then it's kind of like fumbling on the kickoff. Okay? So if there's one question that you need to practice and you need to become, you need to go a little bit crazy and you need to talk to yourself. You need to practice articulating these answers, not just in your head, but actually saying them. Because it's one thing to have an idea in your head, and it's another idea to express this idea in words. This is the one you got to rehearse, okay? And you got to make sure you can do it succinctly in about 20 to 30 seconds. So practice. Second type of question is the strengths question. So these are questions that asks you to emphasize your value. They come in different forms. Why should we hire you? What are your 3 greatest strengths? What's an accomplishment you're most proud of in your career so far? What contributions could you make to our company? These are all different ways of saying, what are you good at? Like, what's your value here? Okay? So what's nice about these questions is that this is a chance to sell yourself directly. Okay? Unashamedly sell yourself. These are like softball questions, essentially. So the trade-off is you don't want to whiff softball questions, right? Like these are the ones that you should be knocking out of the park. And if you can't knock these out of the park, then you're pretty much in a bad situation. If you can't hit the slow pitches, you're not going to hit the fast pitches. Okay? So selling points. That's the key there, selling points. The third type of question are weakness questions. Questions that ask to identify your weaknesses. So these are going to be questions that we know that nobody's perfect. We know that everybody has limitations. Everyone has flaws. The interviewer wants to try to figure out what are these for you, okay? So with weakness questions, they're going to ask you things like, what are your weaknesses? Okay, so that's a very common one. What are your weaknesses? Name a time when you failed to complete a project and why. Okay, so this might be something where you have to look back at something that you didn't complete and what was the story behind that. What might be a negative thing that your boss or a coworker would say about you? Okay, so this is something where you need to be aware of, like, what do other people think of me and what might be a negative thing that they might say? So, very common question people struggle with, what are your weaknesses? So here's a formula. Weakness plus control, okay? That's what you want to have in your weakness answer. So on the weakness side, you want to make sure it meets two criteria. Number one, you want to make sure the weakness is legitimate. So you want to avoid Michael Scott answers from The Office, where it's like, my weaknesses are that I work too hard, I care too much, and sometimes I just get too invested in my job, okay? Those aren't really weaknesses per se, or they're so cliche that it's kind of like, you know, can you come up with something better? Perfectionist is a cliche weakness, right? It's not really a weakness at the end of the day, but you try to sell it as one. So make sure it's legitimate. Secondly, at the same time, you want to make sure that the weakness doesn't disqualify you from the position, okay? So what we want to avoid is like, my weakness is that I come to work late a lot, you know, or like my weakness is that I don't really like people, you know, like, so there, you know, if you're applying for customer service jobs, and, you know, that's probably going to disqualify you from the position. So you still have to pick a weakness that's legitimate, but isn't going to disqualify you at the same time. So I had one client who her weakness was, what she was trying to get at was like, she always likes to do favors for people and then she can't get her own work done. So her weakness was essentially that she has a hard time saying no to things, okay? So if she were to say it like this, well, my weakness is that sometimes I get asked a lot of favors from employees, and so I have a hard time saying no to people, so I end up, you know, getting overwhelmed with favors that I don't get a lot of my work done, okay? Now, she just ended it there. Here's the problem. Now it's up to the employer or to the interviewer to decide, well, is this a weakness that I can tolerate, right? And so you're leaving it up to the employer or the interviewer to have to deal with your weakness. So what you want to do is you want to express to the employer or the interviewer that it's all good. Like, I have this weakness, but it's all good because I got it under control. Like, you're not going to have to worry about it. And that's where the control part comes in. Control explains how you control your weakness. So essentially it is, here is what I'm doing about my weakness to be better, okay? So going back to the favor thing, if she were to say something like, you know, I have too many favors and I don't get my work done, and just leave it there, that's a problem. But if she adds this part, my weakness is that sometimes I get bombarded with favors and I have a hard time saying no to them because I try to be a team player. And what happens is I end up not being able to get a lot of my own work done because I'm trying to help other people. So what I've done to control that is I actually keep a calendar of favors that I am doing. And I have little slots that limit the amount of number of favors that I can do for people in a given day. And what that's done is that's helped me stay much more organized to where I can still be a team player and I can still help other people, but at the same time, control my time so that I can be more efficient and effective in the job that I'm doing now. See what we did? So we showed that how this weakness is something that you've recognized, and now you're doing something about it, and now it's making you a better worker. So essentially, the weakness question becomes a strengths question, okay, in a Houdini kind of way, okay? So that's what you want to do in your weakness question. Weakness plus control. Okay, so think of your answer, articulate it. Fourth type of question is collegiality questions. These are questions about your ability to get along with other coworkers. So these are going to be things geared towards the cultural fit aspect of things. Will you get along with people? Will people like you? So examples, describe a time you had a conflict with a colleague. How'd you handle it? Very common one. How do you feel about working with elderly patients? If, like, let's say you're in a hospital. How do you feel about working weekends and overtime? So if it's a very busy place, you need to be clear about that. And how do you feel about traveling 25%? Now, here's the thing about these types of how do you feel about traveling 25% type questions. Nonverbals are going to say a lot here. If you're just kind of like, how do you feel about traveling 25%? You're just like, okay. You know, like, it's just kind of like, it sounds too unsure, right? We want to make sure that if you're going to be traveling 25%, you're cool with traveling 25% because we don't want you quitting 3 months after you get hired, right? So this is where headline plus story works really well. How do you feel about traveling 25%? Oh, I love to travel. In my previous job, I actually had to travel once a week, and I wish I could have traveled more, so that would be great. You see what I mean? So now, not only am I just saying, yeah, you know, like traveling 25%, yeah, you know, I have a story and I have an example that kind of solidifies that, yeah, no, I'm cool with this. Here's the reason why, okay? So headline plus story works really well here as well. So yes, consider nonverbal. Sorry, I forgot there was that transition there. All right, cool. Now let's say you were asked the name a time when you had a conflict with a colleague. How did you handle it? So a formula here is the conflict situation plus how you resolved it and how you kept the relationship with a colleague. So example. So I had a client who she was a project manager, and one of her team members was emailing her with his ideas about how it could be ran better. And so they ended up getting into like an email fight. And so what she did was she went to the supervisor of them, and then they sat down and resolved it. Now, when she first told the story, I was kind of like, oh man, you told the supervisor, and now the colleague probably hates you, right? Because you like got him in trouble. So, but then she was like, no, actually, after that we were okay. Like we were able to work fine with each other, and it wasn't a big deal. Okay, so in the formula, you want to talk about the conflict situation. So one time, a colleague and I had an email disagreement, and it was going on for a couple of days, and it was really starting to threaten our ability to work together. So how I resolved the conflict was I went to my supervisor and I just said, hey, we're having this conflict through email, and I wanted to figure it out. And so the supervisor met with us, and we were able to sort out the disagreements that we had. And after we worked with the supervisor, okay, now we're on how you kept a relationship with a colleague, my colleague and I were able to continue working together in a very collegial way, and it was almost like as if nothing ever happened. Okay, so the conflict situation, how you resolved it, and how you kept the relationship with the colleague. Because it's not just a matter of can you solve a conflict, it's also can you keep relationships with others. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have all of those pieces there in your answer. Then lastly, you have the job-specific questions. And these are questions about how you perform the job. So remember when I showed you that job posting and I told you, name a time when you've done this, name a time when you've done that, provide examples. This is to prepare for these types of questions, job-specific questions. So these are going to vary depending on the job you're applying for. So just to kind of give you some examples, describe your management style. How do you plan to manage multiple projects, multiple deadlines? What kinds of programming techniques are you proficient in? I mean, questions that are very, very specific to the duties described in the job, okay? So you know how to prepare for those. But let's say you get asked an abstract question like describe your management style or describe some kind of blank style. There's different ways you can answer this. The headline plus story is always good. You can use an acronym. So if you have like an acronym to describe your leadership style, I don't know, I use the HAT style of leadership, you know, happiness, attentiveness, and timeliness. I don't know, something. You can use that to explain your style. Or you can give a philosophy statement, usually like a quote or something like that. Well, my leadership style is best summarized by what Zig Ziglar once said, you know, something Zig Ziglar said. Okay, cool. So all of these are different ways that you can describe something abstractly, but headline plus story usually works quite well. Now, at the end of the interview is going to say, do you have any questions for us? You want to have 3 to 5 educated questions prepared for the end of the interview. So you just don't want to be asking, so what's this job again? You know, or what does this company do? Okay, educated, meaning you've done research, you know things, and now you just want some more clarification about things, okay? So, for example, for the Career Center job that I had, the job posting just said I would be teaching workshops, but it didn't say what kind or like what topic. So when I asked my question, my first round of interviews, I said something like this. I said, I see in the job posting that says I'm going to be teaching workshops. Could you tell me more about what types of workshops I'll be teaching and how big these workshops will be? So what I did was I said what I did know, and then I asked what I didn't know, okay? So the key to an educated question, what you know plus what you want to know, okay? Show that you read the job posting, then ask for your clarification, okay? That's how you sound educated. Now, the question that people usually have when they say, but if you write down your questions ahead of time, the interviewer might answer them during the interview. And then when they have questions, when they ask you if you have questions, you don't have any. Okay, so here's what you do when you have 3 to 5 written down questions, and let's say the interviewer did address them throughout the interview because you had a very conversational interview. So this is what you do. The interviewer says, do you have any questions for us? Oh, yes, I do. Okay, so you pull out your sheet, and then you review the answers with the interview. Okay, well, I was going to first ask you about the community service opportunities that the company has. So based on your answer, from what I gathered from the interview here, it looks like we get to do community service through this channel and through that channel. Is that correct? Okay, great, great. Okay, so what you're doing is now you're showing how good of a listener you are, you see? And they still get to know what you were interested in. Because the thing you have to remember about asking questions is that your questions are statements. So people are going to wonder, why are you asking this? So if your question is, what's the tardy policy like? The statement you're making is, I'm concerned about tardies, right? And the interviewer is picking up on that. Now, go to your second question. So maybe while you're going through your answers, so let's go back to what if your answers are addressed here. Let's say you get to the second question. So like you go through your first question. While you're reading the first question, you can start thinking of follow-ups to the second question. So, okay, so that's great about community service. I was also going to ask about the team sizes. So you said that the team sizes are going to be about 10 to 12, so I'll be working with 10 to 12 people. Can you tell me more about the type of people I'll be working with? See, so now you can do a follow-up question, you see, and still show that you're listening and still learn more about the company, okay? So review the answers with the interviewer, show that you listen. So questions are statements, remember that. Then we're lastly on to the post game, okay? And in the post game, there's a couple of things going on. First, you got to have a thank you letter. You want to write a thank you email to the interviewer. And my timeline is usually 12 to 24 hours after the interview, okay? Sometimes, you know, it might be weeks before they make a decision. Sometimes it might be the next day. I always think that once you interview, the next day, whenever after everyone's gone to sleep, it's a good time to send a thank you email, okay? That way, at least after they've slept a day, they can still remember you. You can use it as an opportunity to remind them of you, and it's good, okay? Now, the key components to a thank you letter, you should always thank them for the opportunity, right? You should say, dear so-and-so, and you can email this. Some people are very like, it needs to be handwritten. I think email is perfectly fine. It's typical business correspondence, and a handwritten letter can also be too personal for some people. So I like email. I've never had a problem with it. So initially, thank them for the opportunity. Thank them for the opportunity to discuss your qualifications for the position and, you know, learning about the company. Then what you want to do, and you have to do this in a balance, okay? Because you don't want this to become a sales letter. You still want this to be a thank you letter. But somewhere in there, in between the thank you and the closing, you want to remind them of why you're a good fit for this position. So as we discussed, I really think the team environment of working with 10 to 12 people all at once really fits my ability to excel with other people, blah, 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 something like that. So what you want to do is the takeaways. What are the key 2 or 3 takeaways of this interview? Remind them, okay? Show them that you really want the job. And then lastly, you want to close with an affirmation of your continued interest in the job. So you want to have somewhere in there that says, I'm really interested. I really look forward to hearing from you all and possibly moving forward or potentially working for you and your company. The reason you want this part in here is because you want them to know that you really want the job. Because sometimes what it comes down to is not who's most qualified, but who appears to want the job more. Because if they're going to make an offer, they don't want to be rejected. Okay? The other reason you want to have this is because if you decide after interviewing, and this might happen, you don't want to work for this company, you don't want this job, the thank you email is where you bow out of the interview process. So that way they don't consider you and they'll consider somebody else. So in the thank you email of rejection, so let's say you're going to say, no, I don't want to move forward. Go ahead and thank them for the opportunity. You can skip B and then just go to C, okay? And then just say, thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss my qualifications for the account management position. I really enjoyed getting to know all of you and what the company's doing. However, I'm really interested in I really want to pursue other opportunities for a company that I think would be a better fit for my qualifications, but I thank you so much again for reaching out to me and letting me learn more about the company. I wish you the best in your search, something like that, okay? You don't want to burn bridges because you never know. You might be applying at this company at a later time for a different position. So you want to use the thank you letter. You want to sound positive about the company, and you just want to thank them and just say, sorry, just not interested, and it's cool, right? And you move on from there. So that's pretty much it for interviewing, at least in 75 minutes. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me, tweet at me. I know this is a lot, and this is going to take practice. This is not something you get good at because you saw a lecture on it. This is something you get good at because you do it. Okay? So I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.